We are going to learn to graph a relation today. So the steps in graphing a relation are to first, if given a word problem, like the one here, the number of seashells is related to the number of students who collected. There are 12 seashells to start. Each student collects 3 seashells. To graph this question, what we would do is we would first write a relation to represent this. Then we will create a table of values, which is also known as an input-output table. We will choose an appropriate scale for our horizontal and vertical axis and label them. And then we will create titles for our axis and the main graph. Then we will plot our data. So the first thing that we're going to do is to write a relation. So our question says that the number of seashells is related to the number of students who collected. We don't know how many students collected, so we're going to let C be students collecting. So we have just assigned a variable to represent the students collecting. It tells us in the question that there are 12 seashells to start, and then each student collects 3 seashells. So we start with 12, and each student collects 3 shells. So our relation is 12 plus 3C is related to C. So that is step 1. We will then create a table of values, and for our table of values, we would choose an appropriate scale, an appropriate number of output numbers. So my input is going to be C for students who are collecting, and my output is 12 plus 3C. So we'll use output numbers of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if 0 people help, how many shells are collected? If 1 person helps, how many shells are collected, and etc. So the first thing to solve for our input-output, we will write our relation, and we will then substitute our input numbers. So 12 plus 3C when 0 students help, so we have 12 shells, and 3 times 0 is 0. So no shells will be collected if nobody helps, and therefore we have just the 12 shells that we started with. Then 12 plus 3C if 1 student helps. We substitute in 1 to represent the number of students collecting. We multiply. 3 times 1 is 3, and 12 plus 3 is 15. We'll do one more to double check our pattern. So our next input number is a 2. So if 2 students help collect, we replace the 2 in place of the C. We have to multiply before we add. 3 times 2, we get 6. And 12 plus 6, we get 18. We will notice a pattern that we are adding 3 each time. So 18 plus 3, we get 21. Plus 3, we get 24. And plus 3, we get 27. So our pattern has continued. So now we have our input-output table, and our next step is to choose an appropriate scale for our horizontal and vertical axis. So our numbers are starting at 12, and they are all numbers that they're even and odd. What we can do is we can choose our space down below. We have enough space on our graph that we can create, probably go up by 2s. So I'm going to start down below, right about here. And for my input scale, I'm going to go up by 1. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 right on my line. And then I'm going to increase by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And I'm going to go all the way up to 28. So therefore I have 27 represented, halfway between 26 and 28. So we have our graph labeled with input and output. We need to create titles for those. So we said our input, which is along our horizontal axis, represents the number of students collecting. So let's write that down. Number of students collecting. Okay? And then for our vertical axis, it represents our output, which is the number of shells collected. We have now labeled both our horizontal and vertical axis. We need to now create a title for our main graph. So our title for our main graph could be the number of seashells collected compared to students collecting. I'll underline my title, make sure it's written nice and neat. And then the very last step is for us to plot our data. So we find our input number of, my first input number here is a 0. And when my input is 0, my output is 12. So on my 0, I will line up and find plots and plot at point 12. So when input is 0, my output is 12. My next is when input is 1, my output is 15. So at 1, 15. 15 is halfway between 14 and 16, so we place a dot. 2 is 18, so we'll place our point at 2 and 18. The next is 3 and 21, which is halfway between 20 and 22. 4 and 24. And then 5 and 27. Once we've created our graph, we are able to lay a straight edge along our points, and so we will say this is an increasing linear relation. And this is how we would describe that graph. Please contact me if you have any questions.